class family, and so that influences some of how I come to this topic of algorithmic bias and algorithmic awareness. I'm going to be talking today about how algorithmic bias is something that's not just seen in our search engine results, but that is really pervasive throughout our society, and that it privileges some groups and some individuals and it disadvantages others. And I have overall been privileged by those systems. So I want to acknowledge that as I go into this topic. Also, to get us started, I'd like to have some sense of people's background and interest in this topic. So if you could complete a short poll that April is going to launch. This is just getting your familiarity level. If you can describe how familiar you are with algorithmic awareness or related issues like algorithmic bias. So 1 is new to the topic, 2 somewhat familiar with the concept or topic, 3 knowledgeable but want to learn more, and then 4 highly knowledgeable. And I see responses coming in here. I'll give you all a few more seconds. Looks like we still have some folks weighing in. Okay, looks like our responses have stopped, so mostly stopped. Okay, so I'm going to share the results here. Hopefully you all can see that. We have 87% of people who participated. We've got about 14% saying they're new to the topic, 56% somewhat familiar, 27% knowledgeable, want to learn more, and about 3% highly knowledgeable. Okay, thank you all for that. And we're going to do one more. This is about your experience with teaching. Again, if you could use the poll that's being launched here to share about your level of teaching experience with algorithmic awareness and issues like algorithmic bias. So 1, have not taught them; 2, touch on the topic but not in depth; 3, address the topic at times with some degree of depth; and then 4, teach about this regularly. All right, we got responses from everybody. Awesome, thank you. So I will, or it looks like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna end the poll. So 52% have not taught about them. 37% teach on the topic, but not in depth. 6% address the topic at times with some degree of depth, and then 4% teaching about this regularly. Okay, so sounds like we've got a range of experiences, most people somewhat new to it. So it'll be valuable to have your different perspectives when we move into discussion. All right. Okay, so to get us basically on the same page, let me give a little bit of overview of the topic. So first of all, let me define what an algorithm is. So this comes from the Merriam-Webster dictionary: a procedure for solving a mathematical problem in a finite number of steps that frequently involves repetition of an operation broadly, step-by-step procedure for solving a problem or accomplishing some end. Now, as you can see from this definition, it's not specifying computers, although when we hear the word algorithm, that's usually how we think about it. We think of, databases, search engines, and that's mostly the way that I'm going to be focusing on it today as well, but we'll see that it's a little bit broader than that. Algorithmic bias, as defined by Wikipedia, is the systematic and repeatable errors in a computer system that create unfair outcomes, such as privileging one arbitrary group of users over others. Now, this is a very kind of simple definition. As you'll see when I present how I do the workshop on algorithmic bias, I ask students at the beginning to give their own definition of algorithmic bias, and I get quite a range of answers, and almost all of them are always right. But they're all coming at it in a little bit of a different angle. So there's really a lot of layers to algorithmic bias. So this short definition can only kind of scratch the surface of it. When I talk about algorithmic awareness, I'm thinking largely about awareness of the presence and influence of algorithms in digital environments in our experiences within these environments. Although, again, an algorithm doesn't necessarily have to be in a digital environment. Like, you know, we have kind of shortcuts, mental shortcuts for how we make decisions. And there's a kind of algorithmic logic that goes behind that, as we'll see in a video I'm going to show in a second. I also think of algorithmic awareness as an awareness of differences in the information that's provided to various individuals or social groups, or the decisions that are made about those groups or for those groups due to algorithmic design. So we might call this algorithmic bias. So for example, if you apply for a mortgage, there's an algorithm that makes a decision about whether or not you're going to get that mortgage. And it's pulling in lots of different pieces of information. It's making a prediction about how likely you are to be able to pay that mortgage. And, you know, it's basing that on certain assumptions. So that's one example of how algorithms are driving certain decisions. Okay, so I'm going to show you all a brief, well, about 3 minutes of this TED Talk from Cathy O'Neil. She is a data scientist and mathematician who knows far more about this topic than I do, but I think she does a really helpful job of introducing the basic concept of what is an algorithm and just how pervasive algorithms are in our lives.
Algorithms are everywhere. They sort and separate the winners from the losers. The winners get the job or a good credit card offer. The losers don't even get an interview, or they pay more for insurance. We're being scored with secret formulas that we don't understand, that often don't have systems of appeal. That begs the question, what if the algorithms are wrong? To build an algorithm, you need two things. You need data, what happened in the past, and a definition of success, the thing you're looking for and often hoping for. You train an algorithm by figuring out, the algorithm figures out what is associated with success, what situation leads to success. Actually, everyone uses algorithms, they just don't formalize them in written code. Let me give you an example. I use an algorithm every day to make a meal for my family. The data I use is the ingredients in my kitchen, the time I have, the ambition I have, and I curate that data. I don't count those little packages of ramen noodles as food. My definition of success is a meal is successful if my kids eat vegetables. It's very different from if my youngest son were in charge. He'd say success is if he gets to eat lots of Nutella. But I get to choose success. I am in charge. My opinion matters. That's the first rule of algorithms. Algorithms are opinions embedded in code. It's really different from what you think most people think of algorithms. They think algorithms are objective and true and scientific. That's a marketing trick. It's also a marketing trick to intimidate you with algorithms, to make you trust and fear algorithms because you trust and fear mathematics. A lot can go wrong when we put blind faith in big data. This is Kyriasaurus. She's a high school principal in Brooklyn. In 2011, she told me her teachers were being scored with a complex secret algorithm called the value-added model. I told her, well, figure out what the formula is, show it to me, I'm going to explain it to you. She said, well, I tried to get the formula, but my Department of Education contact told me it was math and I wouldn't understand it. Gets worse. The New York Post filed a Freedom of Information Act request, got all the teachers' names and all their scores, and they published them as an act of teacher shaming. When I tried to get the formulas, the source code through the same means, I was told I couldn't. I was denied. I later found out that nobody in New York City had access to that formula.
Okay, so O'Neil does a really nice job, I think, of explaining what is an algorithm in very basic terms, and then showing just how powerful these things can be in everyday lives. So she goes on talking about these teachers. There's actually a positive into this story in that they were able to get, actually the story goes bad and then it gets better. A lot of these teachers, including award-winning lifelong teachers, got fired because this algorithm was determining that they were not good teachers, right? It was looking at things like test scores and not taking into account lots of other things, and then deciding that because the kids were not getting great scores, that made the teachers bad, and so they let them go. But fortunately, that got reversed. They corrected things, but how many times does the story not end that way? I'm afraid that probably more often the story does not end as well, where that kind of injustice often is not corrected. And that is just one example of how algorithms are making decisions, and we're often placing kind of blind trust in them, right? She talks about algorithms not being neutral, right? Technology is not neutral. And while we think about this a lot in libraries, I think there's still a common tendency in our culture to believe that technology is neutral, algorithms are neutral. The search results you're getting at least in the library database is to be, is kind of unbiased, so to speak. So she's really pushing against that idea and asking us to think more critically about algorithms and the consequences they're having in our lives. So when we think about algorithmic bias, it's happening on a number of different levels. One way we can think about it is that algorithms are designed to replicate past decisions and actions. So for example, if you give interviews to people with resumes that look like those of past or current employees, if you already have an inequitable hiring system, it's going to perpetuate that system. So for example, if you, with examples of a lot of large tech companies like Google, if they take their past resumes and they are mostly white men, and there are kind of signals of that, right? Like let's say somebody went to Ivy League school and they're using that kind of information to determine algorithmically what people are going to get interviewed, it's going to perpetuate that same inequity. Another example is biases that are baked into an algorithm's training. So for example, facial recognition system that's trained only or mostly by images of white cisgender men. You might have heard the work of Joy Fiolowini. I may not be pronouncing her name quite right, so I'm sorry about that. And then the Algorithmic Justice League, there's a really good documentary on Netflix called Coded Bias, where they talk about this work of looking at facial recognition systems that don't recognize faces of color. That's just one of many examples in their work of algorithms having a bias. Another example of algorithmic bias is human biases that algorithms learn and then mirror back. So for example, Google searches auto suggestions will suggest things that other people have searched for. And sometimes that may be perpetuating misinformation. For example, that the Holocaust never happened. If you started to type into Google, at one point in time, it would have made that suggestion. Now, Google has done things at different points in time to try to correct for that, but it hasn't corrected everything, and it probably never will be able to immediately correct everything. But yes, this is definitely just one example, right? The auto suggestion. Another is Google searches ranking according to popularity. So if something was clicked on more, it's more likely to appear higher in their search results. Or Google image searches for marginalized social groups. You may be familiar with the work of Sophia Noble, who did a lot of work in this area, recognizing that images, when you did an image search in Google for something like Black girls or Latina girls, you were getting a lot of highly sexualized images, and Google has also corrected that, but there are many groups where this kind of thing is still happening. Okay, I'm going to, in a moment, show you the workshop that I do and give you a little more background on the workshop, but I wanted to give a heads up that these are questions you might be thinking about and that we'll have an opportunity to discuss. So one is, how does the topic of algorithmic awareness fit or not fit into your teaching? Another is what opportunities you see for teaching about algorithmic awareness and what barriers you see to teaching about it. And you might also think about possible responses to those barriers. Okay, so with that said, let me give a little bit more background about the workshop I do. I've been doing it for about 2 years, maybe a little longer than 2 years now, and it is part of the Rowan University Library's workshop program. And I've included the links to these things. If you open up the slides, I'm not going to put them in the chat right now, just since I'm sharing my screen, that would be a little bit tricky. But again, if you open up the slides, you'll be able to click on those things and see all of these links that I'm sharing. So we have a workshop track that we offer each semester that does a lot with digital literacy, online information habits, and things like this. And in addition to offering it as part of the workshop program, and that, by the way, that workshop program is open to the public, but we mostly get students, faculty, and staff from the university who attend. I've also offered it as a session for credit courses, mainly for a course on writing, research, and technology. Mostly, I've done this workshop online through Zoom, but I have also done it in in-person settings. And in all of those cases, I use a Google Doc for interactivity, whether in person or virtual. And I'm looking at the potential for expanding this workshop to other venues and audiences, because I think it's something that is not just relevant to academic communities, but is really relevant to everyone. And I want to see more awareness of the issue growing. So here are the workshop outcomes. First, that we reflect on the role of algorithms and algorithmic bias in our everyday lives and more broadly in our society and social structures. We identify scenarios in which algorithmic bias may influence the information that a person sees in any given online environment. And we identify and apply simple strategies for recognizing and counteracting the negative effects of algorithmic bias. Now, related to that last outcome, I recognize this is a huge systemic issue, and it's not something that any one person can solve. And at the same time, there are small steps we can do, like raising our own individual awareness, helping others to increase their awareness. And then there are things we can do in terms of, thinking about how we search online, how we select what information we're going to look at, some privacy tools that can limit to some extent how much we're being tracked, even though I know those are not perfect fixes by any means. So I try to give a kind of sense of empowerment in the workshop too, so that people aren't just feeling like, oh, there's nothing I can do. Okay, so there is a workshop template that is a Google Doc, and I'm going to open it up in just a second, but I first want to give a kind of big picture view of how I structure the workshop. So whether it's in person or virtual, I'm again using this Google Doc to facilitate engagement and interaction, and it also serves as a record of the workshop. People can come back to it. The template includes activities and reflection prompts that are interspersed with new learning content. And then here's basically how I structure the workshop. First, defining and contextualizing algorithmic bias, asking participants about their understandings and views of algorithmic bias, exploring the extensive influences of algorithms on everyday life, and really emphasizing that we're starting with awareness and education. It may be an issue that's bigger than any one person can solve, but we are taking small steps, and then we're looking towards advocacy for algorithmic justice. And then I also share some privacy practices and tools that can reduce the negative impacts of algorithms, at least on one's immediate experience. Okay, so this workshop template I'm going to open now has a CC license. And I'm just going to run through briefly what I do in it. So I create, I make a copy of this, and then I modify it for the workshop I'm giving, put in the date, etc. And I make a link here that actually I'm gonna, just so that if people want to be looking right in there, let me put that in the chat as well. And I'm sorry, I'm not like able to see anything. I haven't really been watching what's going on in the chat. I see there's been some discussion, so I'll see if I'm able to look at some of that when I get done presenting. But for now, I'll just keep going forward. All right, so that link will allow you to see the template. And you can click on any of these links to get to a specific part of the workshop. I start with an overview. I share the learning outcomes, and I also give context. So if it's a virtual workshop, just explaining that we're going to be using this Google Doc. People are invited to add to it anonymously if they prefer. So if they want to add to it anonymously, I tell them they want to be logged out of their Google account, or their name will show up, just so they have an option for how they want to engage. I also share some grounding principles that just communicate how I'd like us to interact with each other, how we can respect one another. And I think that's particularly useful when you're doing a one-off workshop like this, and also when you're dealing with an issue that may be sensitive for people. Some people may be more adversely affected by algorithmic bias than others. So I won't read through all of these right now, but feel free to come back to those. And then I start similarly, actually, to what I did today. I will work towards a definition of algorithmic bias, first by giving people a definition of bias, and then by giving them a definition of algorithm. And then I ask them, after thinking about that definition, to define or describe algorithmic bias. And it's really interesting, the many responses that I get, the many thoughtful responses that I get in the Google Doc, and how that becomes an opening for talking about just how multifaceted and complex algorithmic bias is. And then I copy and paste in that Wikipedia definition that I shared with you all. And we look at how actually the definitions people have provided add a lot more nuance to that definition. And then I do a kind of informal poll. I frame this workshop as, is Google neutral, even though we're not only talking about Google. And so I ask people to put an X by the category that best describes what they think about Google in terms of neutrality, right? Scale from 5 to 0. And then I ask them to explain their rating in this next question here. So that also opens up some interesting discussion. And there's a lot of participation in the document itself. And I also create time for people to speak if they want to use their mics, or they want to put things. Well, I don't really use the chat as much because the Google Docs kind of serving as that function for writing ideas down. But we'll often, within these activities, after people have some time for reflection and writing, then have some discussion. Some groups are more vocal than others. And then I ask people to think about algorithms in relation to their in relation to their everyday lives. So I ask them some ways that algorithmic bias influences their life. Those could be small or large ways. And then we watch a few videos, and for each video, I give them a prompt to be thinking about, and they can add their thoughts in response to the prompt into the Google Doc. So the first one we watch is from Sophia Noble. Your search engine results could be perpetuating racism. And so she talks a lot about, Google, the bias that comes in there, the kind of corporate model, the drive for advertising money that is really influencing what Google is showing us or not showing us. And she frames algorithms as a social justice issue. And I think that hearing that is often eye-opening to people, because most people have not heard algorithms talked about in this way. They've heard them more as kind of this neutral thing, right? And to instead say this is a social justice issue that affects lots of things about our lives. Like, are we getting a job interview? Are we getting a job? Are we getting a mortgage? Are we getting, a student loan? And the list goes on and on. So I think that is a helpful opening for the topic. And then we watch a video from Digital Garage that introduces people to search engine optimization, or SEO. And I ask them to think about key points the speaker's making and who the intended audience is. And the intended audience is basically people who will pay money to have their websites, their business websites optimized using SEO, right? So it's a company that offers SEO services. And so they're giving a very cheerful kind of representation of algorithms and how you can make them work for you. And so it's an interesting contrast to some of the other things that we look at. And then after we watched that, we watched the trailer of the documentary, The Social Dilemma. So many of you may have seen this or heard of it. And so here I asked them what key points are being made and how the video compares with the previous one. And this gets us into thinking about a lot of ways that algorithms affect us, in various platforms, social media among them, and a lot of the kind of effects that it has on social interactions and people's everyday well-being. In time allowing, I show part of the clip I showed you all earlier from Kathy O'Neill on blind faith and data. I often don't have time for this, but I also, leave some space for that possibility. And then we move into people doing a few exercises where they're thinking about algorithms' influence on them when they're in online environments. For example, they go look at their Google settings. So at Rowan, where I work, we have Google Drive. So everyone has a Google University account. And people are often surprised when I ask them to go look at their settings, how much information is actually being gathered about them, or how many settings there are that are giving them personalized results, even though education Google sites are supposed to be better about that. They're actually tracking an incredible amount of information. So we have a look and we think about what are the things that you can do, like settings that you can change to limit how much personal information is being stored about you. And then we also do a similar exercise with Chrome browser settings, where we look at what options there are for limiting the information that's being stored about people. There are some other activities that I suggest people can do outside of the workshop, but we usually don't have time for because of the time. So searching when logged into or out of a Google account, or searching with another search engine like DuckDuckGo. And then I present a few privacy tools. I'm listing several here. And I emphasize, these privacy tools aren't simple fixes that are going to make all these issues go away. But they are small things you can do to engage a little more critically in online environments and be a little more aware of what may be being tracked about you, and sometimes to be able to block certain trackers. Okay, and then towards the end, I ask people to think about what their next steps are. So trying to think proactively about what things we can do. And then we have time for, I also give them just some other things that they might look at. These are two other, I think, really thought-provoking videos. And that's what I do with the workshop.
Andrea, we have two questions about your workshop.
Okay, well, that's great, because I was going to move to Q&A and discussion now. So I think I'll stop sharing my screen now, although I do have a couple more slides. But let me go ahead and take some questions, and we'll see how much time we have then for people to reflect on some of those questions that I've presented at the start.
The first question is, how many students have completed the workshop?
That's a good question. Of like total over all the times that I've offered it. Trying to count, my brain is not a math brain. But I'm guessing, and it's not just students, it's also, faculty, staff, community members sometimes. I'm guessing that probably around 100. That's a very rough estimate. And that's everything, like the classes I've taught, the workshops I've given.
And does the workshop normally last about an hour?
Yes, it's an hour. That's right.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? You can put them in chat, or we could call on you if I can. All right. Have you modified this workshop over time?
I have, and trying to think now, what are some things that I've changed? I've added some of the videos that weren't there before. Most of it is pretty similar to how it started out, but little tweaks I've made, but I can't say that I've done like a dramatic changes to it. And I see someone's asking, so I have done it mostly online, but once in person and once as a weird kind of hybrid thing where I was remote, but the faculty member and the students were not. That's not my favorite way to do that, but so for the in-person, I still use the Google Doc, but we also have then, face-to-face discussions. So what I'll do is the way I frame it at the start of the workshop is you have multiple ways that you can engage and participate today. The Google Doc is a way for people to reflect. So I do take, whether it's in person or online, I do take some time to just be quiet and let people think and add some thoughts, because I think that's actually a useful exercise for everyone. And it's particularly beneficial for students who are more reflective learners or maybe a little more shy, because many of you have probably experienced this. Sometimes you have like 2 or 3 students who are maybe really vocal, or sometimes just one, and they kind of like quickly answer everything you ask, right? And then it doesn't become a conversation. So having that Google Doc I have found to be really beneficial for both in-person and virtual instruction, because and it's also kind of a principle of universal design, right? Like offering different ways for people to engage, different ways for people to process the information. It also gives you a record, and people can see what others are thinking at the same time that they're reflecting on their own thoughts. So I've found a lot of benefits from using the Google Doc, and I see that there's a number of questions that I've had. April, do you want to direct me to certain questions, or I can keep scrolling through?
I kind of been writing them down in order as I've been seeing them, so
Okay.
no particular. All right, are you familiar with the Tor browser as an alternative to Chrome?
I am. I have not. I don't know as much about it as I probably should, and I know there's some complexity sometimes in using it, and I know it can be a little bit slower. So I haven't really promoted that, but it would probably be a good thing for me to at least introduce people to. I think I've got a link in there to more privacy tools, and I think it would fit in there. But I also try, to kind of minimize how many things I'm showing people in the workshop, just, to kind of manage information overload.
Okay. All right, here's a heavy one. What do you see as the solution to the problem of bias in algorithm coding besides awareness?
Well, I don't think there is an easy solution, and I don't think there's a short-term solution. I think the short-term immediate things we can do start with awareness. They start with advocacy. They start with community building and education, and then in that community building and education, then taking action in terms of pushing for legislation. I have a link in the slides to the Algorithmic Justice League that's doing a lot of work in this area. There are other places, Mozilla Foundation doing work in having ethical AI. The Center for Humane Technology is another one that's doing a tremendous amount of work. So there is a lot more advocacy and awareness that's growing. This documentary, Social Dilemma, got so much attention, right? And like mainstream attention, not just, it used to be that people who weren't on social media were just, considered these strange Luddites. And now more and more people, I think, are understanding reasons behind that. So I do think things are shifting, and as this continues to grow, the potential for real change grows. We're finally seeing companies like Facebook like really having to face up to the fact that like there are a lot of problems in how their systems are built, and how this is built on a model that's really about money making and not a lot about looking at people's well-being. So yeah, I think The solution is a very long-term one. And I don't know how many people have heard Frances, I think you say Hogg, her name, the whistleblower who left Facebook, talking about Instagram and all the research on the damage that these sites are having on young women's body image in particular. So I do think there are some shifts that are happening, but yeah, there's no one way to come at it, right? I think rather than saying solution, we have to say solutions, and we have to think about it as a really long-term thing. And so I'd like to also think about what are the little things that we can do in our area, our domains, right? And so to me, even something like this, like the workshop I do, sometimes I talk to people who come and I didn't expect them to come, and then they go talk to other people, right? And so it kind of branches out. And I'm hoping in doing something like this today, maybe other people, I know lots of other librarians are also working on this. So, we can talk together, but we can also help spread the word. And yeah, I think that's how I think the greatest change happens, is starting at the grassroots.
Well, this kind of ties in, about other librarians and working together. Someone said that, their concern with teaching algorithm bias is they don't feel like they know enough about the topic.
Yes.
So did you do professional development to inform yourself? So what do you recommend to get there?
I think that's such a real good point. So I will confess that I have felt like an imposter going into this, right? I'm a humanities person. I don't know computer code. I'm not a great person at math. So, I for a while was kind of like, should I even be touching these kinds of things? Because I can't really explain algorithms to people. But, algorithms are often black boxes. They're proprietary. So sometimes no one can explain them. And even if they could, having that really technical knowledge, I don't think that is necessary in order to just start raising awareness, right? So, when I first did this workshop, I was like, is this like pushing too far out of my level of expertise? And I did it anyway. And then people were, seemed to find it very helpful. And I kind of also, I think this is common, that we sometimes underestimate how much we actually know. So I'm thinking, oh, I don't know that much about this topic. And then I come in and I do this, and then people are like, oh, I had no idea, right? I mean, some of the people have more awareness than others, right? But, to me, it's like, of course, I'll go look at the Google privacy settings, but most people, I think, don't even think to look at that. So I also preface it with like, hey, I'm a librarian with a humanities background, and I don't know how to code, okay? Like, that's not my area of expertise, but here's what I can offer, right? Like, I do know like certain concepts. I know how to think critically about different issues, and I know how to like go try to find more information out about things. So, recognizing, yes, I've got these gaps, but I think people really value that. And it also communicates a certain kind of approach to these workshops, that I'm not the only person bringing knowledge to this environment, right? Like, when we are contributing ideas in the Google Doc, I'm learning things from participants as well. They're learning things from one another. And so it is kind of in that spirit of community building and recognizing that everyone is bringing something to our interactions.
Okay. I'm going to put two questions together because they're kind of similar. So are you getting faculty requests for these workshops for their students? And do you teach this content in a 4-credit course that you teach?
So I have had one writing instructor who has had me come to visit his class. At this point, that's the only request I've gotten. I've had other, mainly, I have different faculty members attend my workshops, and it's possible that they're integrating some of this into their classes. Some of them have told me that they're going to be doing that. But they haven't actually reported back to me, and I haven't followed up to ask. So I'm hoping that maybe it's influencing more courses than I know. But yeah, it's only really one class that's really focused on technology and writing and research that I've done it with. And the other part of that question was, well, can you remind me of the second part of the question, April?
Do you teach a 4-credit class that includes it?
So in my current job, I do not teach a credit course. My last job I did. And so I did bring in some of that, although I've become more informed about algorithmic bias and awareness than when I was in that job several years ago. So were I taking that class again, I'd be doing more with it than I was doing at that time.
Okay, a little out of order here. We just got a question. Do you get requests from computer science faculty to teach about the bias?
I really haven't gotten any from them. No.
It's mostly the one class. All right. What are your top 2 or 3 ideas that you recommend that teachers share with their students?
In terms of algorithmic bias or awareness, top 2 or 3. I'm never good at these kinds of questions. But I would say one is really thinking about the pervasiveness of algorithms, that it's not just your Google search results, because often people come to it thinking, oh, it's kind of benign, right? Like it's just, I'm getting slightly different results from my friend because of my location or something like that, right? And then when people attend this workshop, they often are like, wow, this is much more pervasive than I realized. It's, I thought it was just limited to this kind of tiny domain. And so I think that's just that it is basically that it's a social justice issue, right? And why it is a social justice issue and why we all need to care about it. And these algorithms are becoming more and more influential in our lives and harder and harder, often impossible to opt out of. That was kind of one big thing. So I don't know, because of the sake of time, maybe I'll leave it to that one big takeaway. Well, I guess I'll put a second one in there, would be identifying specific concrete things you can do to try to improve things, both for yourself immediately and then also for society more broadly in the long term, because I don't want people walking away just, feeling in despair and saying, well, I can't do anything, right? Like that's not what I want to happen in these workshops.
Are there other resources that librarians can use to develop our topic on this? I know we kind of talked a little bit about that, but.
Yeah, so, there's a number of things that are linked to in the Google Doc that I shared. And if you also scroll down I put some links into the workshop slides. And if you scroll down, looking at my other computer here, but I don't think we're going to have much time for the reflection questions, we'll see. But on that last slide, there's a link to an online resource. It's a LibGuide that says Algorithmic Bias in Search Systems. So that also includes some of the things that I shared today, but it has some additional things as well.
Okay. Yeah, and after probably this afternoon or the morning, I will send out a link to the slides to all the participants. And then we can include a link directly to those resources too. That way people don't have to go through the slides to find that too. And then let's see, we got a couple chats coming in at the last minute. Would you be okay with people sharing the slides outside of our group who've registered for this?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's yes.
Have you thought about how this presentation could be adapted for an international audience who may not use our search engines or may have other factors into place, such as censorship, government controlled media, things like that? Specifically, they're thinking about the international students.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting idea. I had not thought about it. I love that idea. I think I would need to do a little more research. I mean, I think some of it can be adapted without too much tweaking, but there are other things, like I'm really not as well informed about what's happening outside of the US. So if anyone wants to talk more about that, I would love to learn more about it. If people have ideas on ways to expand this out to a more international audience, I think that would be really great to look into.
Okay, another question. Does using Boolean searches short circuit the algorithms?
I don't know. I haven't tested this out, but I don't think there's a way to really like get around them, right? They're there. Like maybe there are ways, like thinking about what search terms we're using, doing multiple searches, using multiple search engines, and being, thinking critically about the information we're seeing. Like someone else here may know more about that than I do, but I mean, that when bias is baked into an algorithm, I don't know that, like, how far things like Boolean operators are gonna take that.
No, I agree with you. I think it helps narrow your searches, but it doesn't really get around the algorithms. All right, well, so we are at 5 till. Do you want one more question if we have one?
Sure.
Let's see, do we have one? I believe, oh, let's see here. No, but someone did comment that even a Boolean search has an algorithm for relevance and what comes to the top. So even then, biases and bias.
Yeah, I mean, it's working from an algorithm, right? So there's no way you're going to escape the algorithm, even though, like, again, like thinking about your search terminology, comparing different search results, will help you be a little more critical in your analysis of the results.
And then I want to thank everyone. Definitely thank you, Andrea, for coming. The chat's
April, do you mind if I just point very quickly to the last slide? Because I didn't really get to I just want to show people, we didn't have time for this, but I want to just show you, let me share what I thought we might be able to do. And I thought we might be a slightly smaller group. So, but this may be, in case this is helpful for people in thinking about your own approaches to this kind of work. So I've done something similar in a conference on a related topic. So I was going to have people get into these 3 Google Docs based on your last names. And then I was going to ask you to put down ideas in response to these as a kind of opening for further discussion. So anyway, we don't have time for that, but I thought it might be helpful to just show people that this is a possible approach. And then again, I've got the link to that LibGuide, which also has a CC license on it. And I've got my email there also. Okay, so I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it back over to you, April.
Well, I was just going to let everyone else know. I just put it in Eventbrite. You have another presentation for us on December 15th. Do you want to give a short sales pitch, invite people back?
Oh, sure. So I'm going to be presenting on another workshop that I do that's also part of this same workshop series at Rowan University Libraries, and it's on debunking misinformation. So I take a kind of similar approach with that workshop. I use a Google Doc quite heavily. So far, I've only done that one virtually, but it could also be adapted for in-person. And so there we're looking at, it's not really as much how to spot misinformation as it is to frame information in order, like to how to correct misinformation, right? Because when someone has been exposed to misinformation, it kind of like already gets latched into their brain. And it's not as easy as just telling somebody, oh, that's not true, here's what's true, right? Because the first thing that somebody heard is what they're more likely to remember. So we go into a little bit of the psychology behind that. And I preface that with, I am not a psychologist, just like I'm not a computer scientist. Yes, so what are some strategies we can do to frame things so that we can correct misinformation in ways that are more effective, that will actually like stick in somebody's head.
Great job. And I don't know if you're seeing the chat, you get lots of thank yous and great presentation. So lots and lots of kudos. You did a wonderful job, and
thank you.
Wait for the 15th to do this again.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. I like talking about these things. So if anybody would like to talk more, has ideas, and people might be, I only sent that to April. I meant to send it to everybody. Yeah, I'm happy to be reached out to, and I know I still have lots more to learn about this, so would value learning from other people as well.
Yeah, and if they miss your email, they can email me too, and I'll get you connected.
Awesome. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Enjoy the rest of your day.